Season 2 of Steering Success, our very first guest and our very first Australian on this podcast, Karl Tlais, a very good friend of mine. Karl, welcome.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here, and congratulations on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you, mate. Thank you. Been looking forward to this because I've been talking to you for a while, and we actually even work in the same building in Media City. I wanted to just start off with your career and do something a little bit different to what we've done in the past. I want to just get a better understanding about your key milestones and the sort of key projects that have significantly sort of changed or shaped your career.
Yeah, look, again, pleasure to be here. And I think when I reflect on my career, it's been a pivotal journey. I think the key words are pivoting, innovation, sort of led changes I had in my career. Early on, I think if I go back to the beginning, I am an engineer by background. So I did do a degree in telecoms engineering. I did a master's as well. But at the time, I had this little entrepreneurship sort of in my DNA. And I set up a software development company at that time. And that led me down a path later on in my career. But I took a choice to join Vodafone Australia at the time. And that was a key milestone. And the reason why I say that is it was just after I'd finished my degree. I'd already had some experience working as a senior engineer for a systems integrator in Australia. But that journey with Vodafone was interesting because we were building out a nationwide network called Globalstar. And that network was the first of its kind around the world, developed by Qualcomm. And I had the opportunity to go and spend 3 months living in the US, in San Diego. That opened my eyes up to many things. One was there is a global economy. But also it opened my eyes up to what was going on in the R&D world, particularly around telecoms. And I got really immersed in that space, came back to Australia. And at that time, it was around a dot-com sort of crash, if you want to call it. A lot of telcos had overspent on their 3G licenses. And Vodafone decided to sell the business unit. And I made a decision at that point in time, why don't I bid for that business? And that led me down a path of going through an entire due diligence phase with them to try and acquire the business. Obviously, 20 odd years later, I'm still here, so I obviously didn't succeed. But the learning I went through in that process was phenomenal.
Why is that so important, like to be able to reflect and look back and take those learnings, even from the things that are so-called, not necessarily big wins or maybe even failures?
Failures are really important. I think this is the key. When I reflect on that journey, we didn't succeed in winning, but we got shortlisted as one of the final 2 bidders. That process alone was unique. And it was a management buyout concept because I was an engineer and we had a lot of engineers with us at the time who wanted to be a part of this project. And so, but the learning was what's involved in running a telco. What's the DNA behind it? It's not just, having a connection to your mobile, whether it be satellite or, GSM services. It was actually having contracts. It was having distribution agreements. It was having HR agreements with your employees. It was licensing agreements with the regulator around the whole telecom side. There's a lot of aspects to it.
So you learn a lot more through that bidding process as you would just working in an actual telco, right?
Absolutely. So what I didn't have a grasp on was the relationship side of the business, which is on the business development side. And that there has a different dynamic. You're building a network, you're operating a network, you're providing a service. But on the other side, there are selling of those services. And the reason for reflecting on this specific sort of time in my career, it gave me an insight on what was happening on both sides of the equation. Which is, even big companies go through transitions, right? And we don't always see that because we look at the brands and the brands themselves are still there. But behind the scenes, there's a lot of changes happening.
Of course.
And that sort of drove me down a path of moving into business development. So when I got out of Vodafone, I essentially drove a path of strategic partnerships and business development to be a career path for me. Although I was an engineer.
An engineer, which is just so strange, mate.
Completely
it's just so
different.
Strange to go from that one side to the other.
Absolutely. And I think this is the learnings that I took all the way through to where I am today. And when I reflect on the journey, it has been a journey of continuous change. And I think change comes from industry movements, but also foresight. And we underestimate that things are happening around us, even when our heads are down and we're focusing on what we're doing today. You got to always have your glaze on what's happening behind that hourglass and what's coming. And I think that for me was a pivotal moment in recognizing that it's not only about what's happening in your organization. It's what's happening in the industry at pace. And there was a lot of transitions back then. Remember, we didn't have the mobile phones today with all the apps. Back then, it was just trying to get packet data services to a mobile, let alone on a satellite service. So that sort of reflected on my journey in a positive way. And it led me down a path of business development. Over a course of a number of different roles, I joined Singtel Optus in a career there, which was fantastic with their business solutions division. And that took me down a path of really building a relationship with vendors. And that was really pivotal because Singtel Optus was obviously driving solutions to the enterprise. And even though I had exposure to that early in my career, it was on the sales side. And so that journey had begun. And so, building strategic partnerships with the likes of Cisco Systems, Juniper Networks, some of the big vendors of the world, that opened up many opportunities. But it also built up some relationships which were globalized. And it was at that time when Cisco in this region found out that, I was here for a trip. I was out here for a holiday. And I ended up having some meetings with the Cisco folk out here, and the rest is history, really. And that was 2006. And I've been an expat ever since. And I think that is where you never say no to a discussion. The learning out of this is, it was actually my last week. I was on holiday here, and the opportunity arose to actually have a meeting. And so I thought, well, I've got some time. Let's meet. And that meeting led to a dialogue. And then I went back to Australia, and then they asked me to come back. And I came back here, and at the time there was some challenges happening in the region. It wasn't very stable at the time. But the opportunity for me was to reflect on Australia was an economy that was moving, but this was a region that needed to move.
Completely different.
And when you look at those two scenarios, I was really in a build mindset and an innovation-driven build mindset. And so, having already had my own startup back in the late 90s and in the early 2000s, I thought, you know what, let's give it a shot. And having that time in the US, as I said, back in when I was at Vodafone, that opened up my eyes to the world. So there were a couple of pivotal journey steps. And then since then, really, I've continued that path. And I think what it has always been has been about building those partnerships with strategic entities, which can open up many different insights. And you gain insights in different ways. So although I'm an engineer by background, those insights have been led through those experiences in those different functions and roles, and building new relationships and partnerships. So even though I was with Cisco, we built partnerships with Microsoft, for example. A lot of people weren't even familiar with that back then. And then that opened up a path because some years later, Microsoft asked me to join them and drive a partnership group for the region, the Middle East and Africa region. And then that just took a different path. So, as you start to look at things, those partnerships you develop over time could end up being opportunities for you to pivot, whether it's by choice or whether it's something that you're seeking, or it's really an opportunity that has presented itself. And I think a lot of the time that's where it happens. They tend to present themselves because you're part of an equation. If you're not part of the equation, then it's very difficult to be noticed. And I think they're things early on in my career which I think always stood out.
Do you think that, because it sounds like your journey in your career has been a lot of people approaching you, tapping you on the shoulder, saying, come and join us, come and do this, this is what we're trying to achieve, and we think you can add value. Do you think that if you had to interview and go through a process and sing for your supper, as they say, do you think you'd struggle in that regimented sort of process because it hasn't been your pathway?
It's been a bit of both. So when I did leave Vodafone, yes, I had to go looking for opportunities. At the same time, even though the taps are on the shoulder, you're still going through a process. And those processes alone, you build up an expectation, right? And so, when you really want something, then you're going to experience the same thing as going out there and maybe searching for a role. But in this instance, I think the way I look at it is, are you ready to embrace change? And are you ready to take something on which is not necessarily in the line of your historical experiences? And so when I look at the transition from Microsoft to Visa, for example, I mean, that was a completely new scenario. And I've pivoted in that world over the last decade, mainly because I opened up my opportunities of engagement to build new partnerships for that organization. So when Visa asked me, come on board, we're building this innovation center here in Dubai, and I thought Visa is a credit card company. But anyway, in the end, it wasn't. It had a vision that it wanted to build these cashless societies and build out seamless payment solutions in the market. And that was a new area for me because I was a lot in the B2B space. And here I was going to the B2C space, right? And that business to consumer world did rely on B2B partnerships, right? And so I looked at it from an angle, and I had the opportunity to build out this organization, the Innovation Strategic Partnership Group. And that group that I built out specifically on the partnership side was focused on digital partnerships, FinTech, which was a new category that I created, and ventures. So to look at venture investments. And another ingredient I looked at was
which no one would think of Visa in either of these categories.
No, you wouldn't.
From an external point of view, they wouldn't.
No, you wouldn't.
No.
And I think what that did was it opened up a multitude of engagements. So deep engagements with obviously government. Although again, I had a lot of this in previous career paths. Even with Cisco, I was doing a lot of this with them. But it provided an insight into what was possible, and the clarity was leadership at the time was giving us that opportunity to do it. And so, we built some strategic partnerships with the likes of TCOM Group and other government entities to look at adoption of biometric payments and various other new form of payments, which today is fairly regular. But back then it was sort of ahead of its time. But what that also did was it gave me an opportunity to look at a new strategic way of engaging in the ecosystem. And to me, FinTech was going to be the one that we had to build up on. And it wasn't just building upon through our traditional partners, which were the banks and the strategic merchants, but it was also around how do we individually start to become more embraced in that ecosystem. And so we partnered with the DIFC with their FinTech Hive and their accelerator, and we're one of the founding partners.
Which explains a lot when I walk through the Hive with you. And so I was making that joke yesterday, right? When you and I walk together through DIFC, it's like walking with a Kardashian or something. You think, you get stopped all the time, and I feel like I'm this side piece there with you. You know what I mean? It's quite overwhelming that everyone knows who you are from the impact that you've had.
Oh, look, to me, it's about those relationships, and I think what I look at is, time is of the essence. Make time available. And I've always been sort of looking at that innovation hub that they've built down there is world class in every way. And I think it's because you feel like it's a campus set up down there. But also it's the fact that, people do remember who is who.
Yeah, of course they do.
And I think that's important because, it's not just about commercializing engagements. It's also around how do you add value to those relationships. And I think to me, sharing your insights is a pivotal part of growing an ecosystem. And
that's why we do this, right?
And this is exactly what this is about. And that's why I love what you're doing with the podcast because, and it's prevailing now, I think, in the region, but it really is the grassroots level, what's really going on. And I think we underestimate the value that's, maybe next door to us, or just down the corridor. And I think the human to human interaction is pivotal to the journey that we're going on. Of digitalizing economies. Most of us think it's all via Zoom. No, it isn't. It's actually this. It's the fact that we can have a conversation in the corridor, remember who it was that opened up an avenue for us in dialogue with maybe entity A, B, or C. And I think that was really a key milestone in terms of the development of the region. It was very early on. This was 2016, 17. And obviously things have just absolutely taken off since then.
You mentioned leaders and leadership and so forth. You are involved with the Capital Club. You are involved in the Dubai Future Fellowship. Am I right in saying that as well?
Yeah.
So you've been involved in Startup Bootcamp, the FinTech Hive. There's a lot of different sort of entities that you've had some sort of involvement with. Okay. Therefore, you've had the exposure to a lot of other leaders in the region trying to innovate, trying to drive change, trying to disrupt, trying to create this sort of country that we all love to live in. Your views on the other leaders or leaders in general in this part of the world, do you think they are doing enough to be able to drive this change that we are talking about, that we're hearing about all the time? We see it in the news, we see it on LinkedIn. Are they doing enough to actually execute on a lot of these plans?
I think you got to look at it as a journey, right? Firstly, we're in a very young region when it comes to digital adoption and digital transformation. When I say young, I'm referring to the fact that the economies are still growing.
Yeah.
And so we're at that early phase. If you go to the developed world, if you go to our home country back in Australia, I mean, that's a 200+ year economy, right? And it's taken a long time to sort of get to where we got to, but it was built on different foundations.
Yeah.
When you come here, we're globalized at the core. And if you think of the talent that's around, and this is your field, right? The talent is diverse, but it's energized.
Mm-hmm.
There is a bit of a thirst out there. You see it for innovation. And I think, the concept of build it and they will come is true here.
Mm-hmm.
It's been built and
they've come.
And I think not only that, they're arriving, not just for the fact that there are opportunities, but just to create a new opportunity.
Yeah.
So if you look at the strategy of government, obviously it's very focused on, the readiness for when that last oil tap gets turned off.
Yeah.
We can't underestimate that. That's going to happen at some point. But that transition has been phenomenal. And the reason has been because there's a vision and a strategy and a mandate.
Mm-hmm.
So when you put those three ingredients together, whether it's at an organizational level, whether you're in an SME or a startup, or whether you're an enterprise or a global multinational, this is very important to execute on. And the multinationals do this, they do it quite well, right? And I've learned a lot of this in the likes of the entities that I've worked with. But also when you come to government vision and reality and execution behind that in terms of realizing that vision, it's happening. And I'll give you a simple example. Was just last week, the AI retreat that Dubai hosted. You can't underestimate what impact that's having in terms of bringing an ecosystem together to collaborate and to thrive together to help shape that future that's coming or already here, because we're using the AI tools today in our phones. And some of the brilliant dialogues that were happening there they're phenomenal dialogues. But the leadership at the government level is there. And I think not only there from a announcement perspective, but actively there. I mean, you saw the announcement by the Dubai government, 22 chief AI officers.
Yeah, I saw that.
Across, many different government entities.
You're not one of them, are you?
No. But putting that in perspective, that's action.
Yeah.
Right. So there is action happening. So when you start to look at that, and that's not only action in terms of, having mandated roles, it's also to create projects. So every year, this AI retreat will take place, and there will be mandated projects to go through and outcomes. But then the ecosystem itself is thriving behind that.
Yeah.
So whether it's big tech, whether it's Microsoft or Google or Meta or others around that ecosystem, there is a subsidiary ecosystem, startup world, the SME world, the individual world. Those that are considering new career paths.
And that is so immature. Like you mentioned, an immature market. That ecosystem that you mentioned now is far more immature than the economy in general.
Totally.
Because we are just so much in our infancy stage.
I mean, if you look at some of the numbers that are being outlined, I think there was a number of $4 trillion to arrive out of AI over the next decade. If you break that down by regions and you start to look at some of the announcements, I mean, probably when I look back at a couple of scenarios that have happened, so on that point you asked about the Dubai Future Fellowship, that was really an initiative that the Dubai leadership created to bring together the private sector industry leaders to help shape that future economy with ideas and new insights across all industry verticals. I don't think there's any country out there that's doing that that I'm aware of.
No.
But in saying that, we different leaders from different angles, we bring what we see and what we hear in the context of where it could go. Yeah. And so, that ecosystem that I represent today, which is a portfolio of entities that I engage with at different, in different phases.
Yeah.
They represent that future digital economy.
Yeah.
They're innovation-led entities. Some are deeply engaged with government. Others are building, world-class solutions, for the digital and data economy.
Yeah.
But they're all looking for the opportunity to innovate.
Yeah.
And I think when I look at, the world of innovation, it's got to be brought in through collaboration, and government sector and private sector need to work closely on that. And that's not just, making announcements, it's also, the collaboration on the ground. And you've got to create the environment for that to happen. And so like you were saying with the DIFC, they've got an AI campus down there. It's fantastic. I mean, if you just walk in there, it's, I think, a 10-level building. But, it's not just AI. You've got, fintechs down there.
Yeah,
You've got,
of course.
digital asset entities down there. You've got Web3 entities. You could imagine the innovation that will be curated out of there. And you can start to think about, how does a regulator start to play a role in helping accelerate some of this? Because, traditionally, regulation has been seen as a showstopper in many markets. But when you reflect on what's happening now, it's actually, there's so many sandboxes being created for innovation to thrive.
Yep.
And so, those kind of things for me are testament to the fact that, it's happening. I think the leaders recognize that, but also the multinational leadership that's in place in the region and the remaining ecosystem, whether it's startups or scale-ups, is thriving behind that. And it's by no coincidence, I think you're probably seeing this, that there are a lot of entities from around the world looking to establish out here, or at least have a presence to accelerate from here.
Which is great for us, right?
Yeah, totally.
You have an advisory business, which is doing really, really well. I've personally taken you aside a couple of times and picked your brain for a couple of hours. And, anyone who knows me will know that I'm a huge believer of mentors and advisors, because I just think, I mean, you mentioned it earlier, being, head down in the weeds, you don't always have that sort of clarity to be able to see through that. Having external viewpoints and opinions that help you sort of, visualize things or even just, see things clearly is just hugely important. And I think it's an underrated tool to use in this part of the world, or probably even globally. Yeah. Some of us, like myself, have been lucky enough to been, exposed to it and been put through sort of leadership programs in other businesses back home in Oz and be given mentors. And I there's no way I'd be where I am today without the external viewpoint, because I do sometimes I bury myself into what I'm doing with blinkers on. Yeah. You run a business that does this, right? So what made you go into that sort of business line? How do you position yourself to potential customers, and what is your unique sort of offering to them where they can really see that value add?
Yeah, look, it's really a result of many journeys. That's how I look at it. So, when I look at my last journey with Visa, I was heavily engaged with many of the startups at that time. And I went just from here. There are in other markets who started to look at FinTech development and partnerships as being, how do we get access to the strategic players? And there was always that gap, the corporate startup engagement gap. And, I'd always been on both sides of the fence. Yeah. And so I could understand where they were because I have been there, but I've also lived most of my career on the other side, on the corporate side. And I always knew there were gaps. The question was, are you KPIing the leaders on the enterprise side to be able to then spend time to engage here? And I think that was always the challenge.
Are they?
It was always a challenge back at that time because things were moving, but you got to remember there is also, there are trusted brands and they have responsibilities. So, you can't just simply fast track, although using the word fast track, I know Visa launched a Visa fast track program for startup engagement, and that was world class at the time. But you still got to go build behind that many other engines, and those engines have got to service. If you think of a Formula One car, you got people that change the tires.
Yeah, of course.
You got those that wipe the visor of the driver.
Exactly. Which is an important role.
Which is an important role, right? And then you got the guy who actually, or the girl who lets them out onto I mean, there's many different facets, right? I look at the fintechs and the startup world potentially as Formula One cars. We don't underestimate the fact Facebook, now Meta, was a startup. Microsoft was a startup. Apple was a startup. They needed the exact same ingredients that we're seeing right now to engage with opportunities in the enterprise and partnering with the enterprise to grow.
So why don't they engage with or more often with people like yourself, because I feel having the privilege of being exposed to a lot of founders and a lot of incubators and within the startup ecosystem, where the real struggle is founders are founders. You know, they are doing marketing, they are doing sales, they are doing operations, they're trying to do HR. I don't know why, but they are. They're trying to do so many different things, and then they have no one there to sort of bounce off, right? To actually sort of guide them or redirect them and say, hey, or pivot. Like you mentioned, so many pivots throughout your career, right? That if you didn't have anyone to sort of, speak to, then how are you acknowledging it or seeing it clearly on your own? There's always someone else that needs to be there to say, hey, I've noticed something in this, maybe pivot this. It happened to me. I mean, I started boutiques, I went to corporates. It's normally the other way around in our industry. People work to corporates, realize they can make more money, so they go to boutiques because the commissions are higher. I did boutiques, and then my mentor said, go to corporates, but you need to polish up. Right, so why aren't they using this? Why aren't they utilizing people like yourself and other resident experts, not only here but around the world, to be able to get that? Is it pride? Like, do you notice when you engage with someone in that first meeting, when they're contemplating getting an advisor in, is it pride, which is like, I don't think I need to hear his or her answers because I have them all?
I think at the end of the day, it goes back down to value. You got to assume that there is value in any relationship that you have, and the value could be simply just a coach whisperer. You know, look at the sports teams that are out there.
Yeah.
I mean, they all have coach whisperers. I mean, you look at them now. I mean, back in the days when I was growing up, and I'm, sort of a rugby, fanatic, but also played rugby. At the end of the day, there was only one coach. Now you look at the fields and you look at the teams.
It's a support staff, right?
There's a coach for defense. There's a coach for attack. There's there is the well-being and the fitness coaches. I mean, there's so many different coaches involved, and then you got the head coach. So when you look at that and you start to say to yourself, okay, who am I surrounded with? I have maybe, and you see a lot of these sort of decks that come out, pitch decks, or which promote the fact that there's advisors on there or different, if you want to call it mentors. But how much real-time engagement is happening? And I think the real-time engagement goes back to time. So time is, you've got to do your thing. You've got to focus on building the product or service, and you've got to get it out to market. And then you've got to, test, modify, adapt, accelerate. You've got to do many different ingredients behind that. And you've got to do things which are all around how do you maintain the bottom line?
Yeah.
Cash flow. So these ingredients there are not easy.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there are entities out there. There are individuals out there which maybe can fast track some of that process. And some of that fast tracking can be through, weekly check-ins. They can be through getting them involved with strategic repositioning sessions. And, I think of it almost like an on-demand service, Every now and again you want to watch a Netflix series.
Of course.
But you can't do it every day.
No. Well, some can.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of people that do that. And the thing is, you need it at the right time. I'm big on documentaries. I love sort of watching sports documentaries because of that sort of that DNA that was instilled in me at a young age. Yeah. But as an entrepreneur, you need to be thinking that way. But even as a leader, these corporate leadership functions are not easy, right? You've still got to, as a leader, you're managing, divisions, or you're growing new teams. And so on both sides of the equation, you got to look at it from that angle. And so when I looked at, setting up myself as an advisor, it happened just organically. And the reason was I was already being engaged for various different ideas and
you're kind of doing the role without
even calling myself an advisor. And so and certainly when I started this back in 2019, or end of 2018, beginning 2019, there were some really interesting, exciting projects and entities, and about half a dozen of them. And I can say openly, 3 of them have done amazingly well. One got acquired last year by Capital One, which is one of the largest banks in the US. But they had a dynamic team. They went through COVID. You got to think of the years, right? Those tough years, and they pivoted.
I always say that my biggest success in my business is just surviving COVID.
Yeah.
In the whole 5 years I've running my own,
That's right.
surviving COVID is by far the biggest success.
And the thing is that, when you can't grow your business organically by traveling, you see the pressures that puts, but it also gives you an opportunity to reassess the market opportunities. It organically happened. These entities were reaching out through different engagements.
Was that the trigger for you to then say, you know
So
what, I'm going to now go down this
Yeah,
path?
so at that point in time, and after seeing some of these engagements coming in different directions, and there were different levels.
Yep.
Some were scale up, some were startups. Others were even from the enterprise space asking me for recommendations.
Yeah.
Because they were looking to build like a digital wallet that would do some service for them more. Those kind of things started to look at, okay, there is a gap. There is a gap in the market, but there's also a need for some thought leadership here to drive some of this dialogue. And I think maybe the fact that I spent so much time in the enterprise world, that trust factor has been there.
Yeah.
And, again, at the end of the day, for me, it's all around what ingredient is there in these entities that are going to shape that future economy. It's always been there.
Yeah.
Whether I was back in my early career or whether it is right now.
What does that look like to you, the future of the digital economy here?
Future is bright.
Yeah.
But in saying that, there is a gradual step process. So if I go back to 2015, 2016, how many of us were making transactions using cash versus digital?
Because I can challenge this digital economy term and the innovation that is around what we're doing with the financial side of our lives.
Yeah.
Because the banks are still what they are.
Okay.
And checkbooks and so many other things. From a layman's perspective, that's not a fintech expert. I look at it and think, exactly what innovation are you talking about? What change? What are we working towards to actually make this what they are setting out to achieve?
So it's like this: you've got to build the highway to be robust enough for the Formula One cars to come on and do their thing.
Yeah.
That hasn't been built over the last 10 years.
Okay.
When I first came out to this region, the highways that were being built at the time, which were, when I referred to that, the infrastructure, the internet infrastructure.
Just so we're clear, we're not talking about Shekshead Road, right?
The internet infrastructure.
Yeah.
So when I refer to a highway, I'm talking about the internet highway. I'm talking about those, broadband services, mobile services. You needed to build that infrastructure to be able to then run the services on top. And so I know this because I was doing this at Cisco.
Yeah.
So I understood exactly where things were going. And I understood, like, with the likes of Etisalat at the time, now Yand. And you got to look at some of these pivots. This is really interesting. Right? It's a good segue. Because they were building out these mobile networks to service, the mobile consumer. But also at the same time, they were looking at providing managed services for enterprise.
Yeah.
And Do came to the game at that time, and it was established. And then through that process, you've seen the readiness of the infrastructure to now handle what's coming, and that's continuous. That's been happening for a while. So when I talk about payments, that's just the readiness of the infrastructure to be there. And I think the smart city strategy has been pivotal to that. In fact, that was one of the main reasons why I set up a smart city focused entity to go and partner with government on things like smart parking and things like adding value to a consumer who's traversing in a city, going to an ENOC to pay for fuel. But at the same time, you're paying that digitally in your phone, which you can do now today, whether you're doing a QR code payment or whatever. But at the same time, it should know that you're there. And it should also know other things about you. And so I've worked on a number of these initiatives. I've written obviously some insights around that as well. As part of a collective group. And that collective group was an ecosystem which comprised of those tech vendors, the government entities, and obviously the payment entities. But that's on one area. So when we're talking about digitalization of economy, you're talking about industry.
Yeah, of course we are.
Right. You're talking about insights that come from the ground. So, the Dubai Digital Authority was set up for that. And then you're seeing a lot of this around different cities now. But when I look at that and I say, okay, we started to collaborate, APIs were being made available. And so the innovation is now driven through open API access. And so, Visa started to do this, obviously, from a payment perspective, but you also saw the government started to do this with It's government APIs for certain data sets. And you can see a lot of this evolving. You'd obviously go to GITEX every year and you'll see a lot of new announcements. Some were delayed, some were accelerated. At the end of the day, the merger is happening, right? And the reason why is the consumer's ready. When we look at our mobile phones,
Are we?
when we look at our mobile phones, and if I look at the one that's right there on this table, I've got a phone which has a stylus, so I can write on it. Now, if I said to you that technology is 24 years old, it was actually done 24 years ago, back in 2000, 2001. I remember the day I actually had this XDA device, and it was a Microsoft operating system device, but it was essentially a PDA. It only had the Microsoft suite of products. It took Apple about 5-6 years later to release the iPhone, and the rest is history. It's all app driven. But we were already getting ready. The apps weren't ready. The devices weren't yet absolutely ready because the networks weren't ready. Now we do have that. Now you've got almost, I think, eAnd demonstrated 35 gig worth of transmission speeds on their mobile network recently.
Who's not ready?
So now everything's ready. Now who's not ready?
Us.
Is individually, are you ready? Now we embrace it.
I was waiting for it.
We embrace it, but we embrace it because we are almost forced to embrace it, to be included, which I call digitally included.
Yeah.
Because if you're not digitally included, you're financially excluded by default. And that doesn't just mean from a payment perspective. It also means from your own credential perspective to be engaged in that economy. So now, if I look at the fact that everything's ready and the fact that we individually need to be ready, literacy is a big challenge because this is where you got to move society forward. Now, you and I are the generation that was born when there was no internet. We came into this world.
Please don't tell the listeners how old we are, man. Let's just...
We are, because we have no hair. They can work it out. So in saying that, though, we can regrow it. But no, in saying that, we were born into a society which wasn't ready, right? Now our kids are born with devices in their hand.
Yeah.
Now I'll play it back for you. Let's look at it this way. I've got a young son. He came to me the other day. He said to me, "Dad, I need ChatGPT." I said, "What?" He said, "I need ChatGPT." I said, "What do you need it for?" He said, "Well, I need to use it. It's a tool.
I need to do my homework."
Probably need to do his homework.
Yeah.
Now, when you've got a 9-year-old coming to you asking not for a toy, although he and I, by the way, we play rugby. We're very active.
Yeah.
But he's coming to me with an idea that he wants to get engaged in this AI world at that age.
Yeah.
Right. And that generation is playing Roblox. They're playing Minecraft. They're in those digital worlds.
Yeah.
They're in the immersive experience world.
Are they good?
Well, they better be. They're buying a lot of skins. A lot of my hard payments are going on these digital skins. But for them, a digital asset is a value.
Yeah, yeah.
For me and you, it's like, what? You spent that much on what?
Exactly.
Some toy gun in the digital world.
Or a wardrobe or something.
Or some kind of an outfit.
Yeah.
Their vision and reality of the future economy, they're going to create.
Yeah.
Right. So they're going to enter our workforce, Gen A plus, at some point. Which means you and I, we're going to transition. The question is, at what point do we transition? It's no coincidence that Gen X is now coming back into the fold because, the various digital social applications that are out there, whether they're TikTok, WhatsApp, Facebook, Instagram, whatever, they're bringing them back in.
Yeah.
So, you can still bring in the older generation into this digital economy, right? So if you look at the global population is 8 or 9 billion people today, half are still offline. They're yet to come online. And most of those are in the emerging markets, and that's mainly around where we are, whether it's West Asia or Africa or, the emerging world, LATAM. But the opportunities is tremendous.
Yeah.
And so if you don't embrace, then you have a few things you need to think about. And it's not just AI. It's, you've got to think about how do you sustain yourself and how do you sustain your family moving forward. And I believe at some point it'll be portfolio careers that'll be part of that equation. May not be for everybody, but I think it'll become part of the equation. And the reason is a lot of the young generation, their attention focus time for one entity or the other, and you've probably seen this when you hire Gen Zs and millennials, there's a constant change element to them.
Yeah.
Right. And that's not because they actually won't focus. They will focus. It's that it's almost like an adrenaline for innovation, a new project, a new thing. And that's fantastic if you can port it across multiple different entities, you see. And I think that's why when I say to someone that's doing a degree in any discipline at university, it's not about the discipline. And I reflect back on my journey. I'm a telecoms engineer. What am I doing in the digital economy? How am I talking about FinTech and sustainable economics and this world on digitizing economies when I should be out there doing mobile networks and traditional networks? And the reason is constant innovation, constant change, and embracing it. And I think this is where individually that young generation, they are embracing it, because if you look at them online downloading new games, they're constantly looking for that new challenge.
Yeah.
They've mastered one, they're going for the next one, right? And so to me, take that step and now apply that into the corporate world.
Nice. The human side of business is something that I always talk about. The AI side, the tech side, is always talked about as a potential replacement for the human, right? Or in somehow, some way, we will no longer need a human to do that job because technology will be able to suffice. And you have a lot of knowledge on a lot of topics when it comes to tech, when it comes to AI. I still believe the driving force behind any business is us, the human beings. Is there any fear at all in you that it's maybe not our generation, but decades away, it's just going to be all digital, all tech focused, all artificially enhanced?
I think if you look around the room, technically a lot of things are processed.
Yeah.
So we're already in that world of transition. But if I have to look at it from a human perspective, you can't replace human to human interaction. I'll reflect on the discussion I had in 2021, almost to the day. This was in May 2021. And it was with, at the Capital Club, it was a fireside chat with Singularity's Dow's head of communications at the time. And we're talking about the topic of AI and its impact on society. Mm-hmm. And straight to your point, humans, they were infusing algorithms into a humanoid machine to get it to think like a human being. So if you ever go to GITEX every year, you go, mostly I think at Detislat or Andstand, you will see the Sophia the robot. They generally have it, and it's just getting smarter and smarter.
Yeah.
So these algorithms that they're infusing in it. Can it do a human task in its entirety? Probably not. Is it going to go and build you a house? No. I think there was a very famous billboard somewhere, I think in Australia, where someone put out, can AI build this? And it was like some tower that was being built. Not yet. But in saying that, we're far off at some point getting to a lot of the physical depth labor stuff that can be brought off that.
Of course.
And you start to be supported by certain machines. But when I go to us, in that dialogue that I was talking about, it dawned on me then that why are we focusing on infusing robots to replicate humans? The idea of technology is to give me back time.
Mm.
I need my physical human time to be given back to me. This mobile phone or smartphone has taken away my time. If I carry this phone and I say to you, how much eyeball time would you like to have back? The question is eyeball time.
Mm.
You see, we underestimated the impact on our eyeballs over the longer term. Now you can imagine that on the kids. They're born into that. So for me, I'm like, well, how about we infuse algorithms into avatars that represent us in the digital world and give me back some physical time? 24 hours in a day, 8 hours to sleep, marginally.
8 hours?
Marginally.
You're lucky.
Yeah, marginally. Let's break it down 3 ways, right?
Your kids are grown, that's why.
Recommended 8 hours to
Yeah.
sleep, 8 hours to work or do whatever you do to earn.
What kind of world is this?
So there you go. Now you're realizing that, hang on, if that's 16 hours, the remaining 8 hours can be broken down as, socializing, maybe doing a podcast, having dinner, traveling, commuting to work. How many hours in the day do you have to go learn something new? Probably 1 hour at best, every single day, right? If AI, as a digital reversion of me, let's call it, KT1, is out there and it's working for me while I'm offline, and it gives me back that 8 hours, I think I'll embrace it.
I remember you and I having this conversation about this, and it was
out there. So this was
it blew my mind.
Yeah. So in 20, this is what I was saying at the time at the Capital Club, and anyway, some days later, I caught up with a good friend of mine, John White, and we ended up writing a white paper on it. We called it Economics and AI in the Metaverse. But the point of this is, we could already feel this was happening.
Yeah.
Right, we were seeing it. I mean, Fortnite is essentially an immersive experience that kids play in, right? Whether you're playing other games or Call of Duty or whatever, they're all still immersive experiences. But you're taking your physical time. You've got to engage. What if I had this algorithm that would work for me and create an income and give me back my physical time so I could choose to do things that would allow? And that, to me, took me down the path of anything's possible.
Yeah.
And so, you could hear more about that. But the point is that it frees me up to be more human. That's the idea. Technology should be freeing me up to be more human. So when I'm using Copilot, it really should be a Copilot, right?
Yeah.
Or if I'm using ChatGPT, what is it doing? It's supposed to give me back time. Now, I think we're going to move down that track at some point. And I think policies that are being written now or being considered are around how do we look at trusted data? How do we look at, because it's all about trust, right? If I'm going to automate everything, well, can't just have society out there, not being productive.
No, of course not.
Although at the same time, there are declining birth rates in the world, so maybe we can be productive.
Yeah.
So, so I think at the end of the day, we need to think of it in the way that it's not going to replace me; it's going to support me to give me back time. I've got to now be efficient into how I apply it into my corporation, into my business, and into my daily life, and be smart about how I can apply and give me back time.
We have to finish up, but I do have one more question because we only touched on it slightly, the whole leadership piece, because we were talking about more about mentors and so forth. So I do want to get your sort of take, 1 word, 3 words, in how would you describe your leadership style?
Empathetic, as simple as that. I've always been a person that cares about colleagues.
Were you always that way?
Always, yeah. It was instilled with me at a young age. I'll give you some background on this. When I was growing up in Sydney, firstly, my parents were my biggest mentors. They're the original expats.
Yeah, of course.
We're first generation, second generation, growing up in Sydney. Got Lebanese genes. You can't see them. But the point is, they embraced trust in me at the time growing up. And in the area I was growing up in Sydney, in Western Sydney, it was mainly elderly retiree Australians. And our next door neighbours, the Owen family, were fantastic because they taught me a lot, Kath and Stan Owen. They taught me so much around life in the early 20th century, living through the Great Depression, world wars, how Australia had sort of changed as an economy and society. And that was instilled in me quite at a young age. And I think for me, caring about your neighbours, caring about, there was always this ethos, right? Looking after the elderly. And before I came to this country and made a decision to be an expat, I made sure that I was there until their last days.
Yeah.
And I think to me, you pass that on, right? So that then instilled in me what I do care about, which is everyone's health, whether it's my direct relationships and family, whether it's my work colleagues, whether it's my leaders. And there's three traits that I always say to people that are top priority for me. And it's in this order. Number one, your personal health. Focus on that. And that means not just a word. It means if I'm not 100% in top line health, I've got no chance of applying myself to support my family. So number two is my family.
Mm-hmm.
Reason is I need to look after my health to be able to then support the family. And if the family relationship and my health are in order, number three comes my work.
Yeah.
And then I can apply myself at whatever level of maximum that I want to achieve in my business or my work. And they're the three things that you got to look at for everyone that you
Love that.
that you support.
Brilliant, man. Karl, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Absolutely.
So, but look, mate, it's been an absolute great chat. Amazing to have you on. I'm so glad we did this, and I'll most likely get you on again, mate. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for having me here.